The presenting sponsor of Andrew Talks to Chefs is Mies. Mies is the chef-created recipe operating system that makes your professional kitchen life easier with unprecedented tools for recording, scaling, analyzing, costing, and teaching recipes, much of it at the press of a virtual button. Learn more at getmeez.com/Andrew. That's GETMeez.com/Andrew. This episode of Andrew Talks to Chefs is supported in part by S.Pellegrino Sparkling Natural Mineral Water. For the past 125 years, S.Pellegrino has supported the art of fine dining in all of its ever-changing forms and nurtured the next generation of chefs through resources and mentorship. To learn more, visit sanpellegrino.com.
I think one of my strengths is that I'm not afraid of being shit at things. That doesn't... It's never bothered me. I had never seen so many black people from other parts of the world, and especially America. And so that was like really interesting to me. I have an understanding of the traditional side, but how I would make that contemporary without doing the thing of falling into the trap of, well, how do I make it acceptable to like people that are not familiar with this cuisine, you know?
That is Ghanaian-British chef Akwasi Brenya-Mensa, who is on the eve of launching a 10-week supper series in New York City. Akwasi and his story are coming right up on Andrew Talks to Chefs.
Massimo Bottura.
This is Amanda Cohen.
This is David Kinch.
This is Mike Anthony.
This is Hooni Kim.
This is Amanda Freitag.
This is Richard Blaze.
This is Paul Kahn.
This is Curtis Stone.
This is Stephen Harris.
This is Missy Robbins.
And you're listening to Andrew Talks to Chefs.
Hey everybody, welcome to the show. This is Andrew Talks to Chefs. I am your host, Andrew Friedman, and our guest today is someone I think you're going to really enjoy meeting, Akwasi Brenya-Mensa. And Akwasi is a British-born chef of Ghanaian heritage who refers to himself actually as a Ghanaian-British chef. There is a reason for that sequencing that we'll get into in this conversation. And Akwasi is someone who I met, I knew about just a little bit, mainly through one or two things I had read and some social media. I knew of him when he was working in London. He had a restaurant called Tatale there. That was quite a successful concept. But I was invited late in 2025 to a salon at the house, or I should say the home, it's big enough to be a house, of Alexander Smalls, who had been a guest on this show in the past. Alexander is, of course, a chef, restaurateur, scholar. I would add bon vivant. I don't think he would mind that, but he periodically throws these gatherings in his home. I'd always wanted to be invited to one. And when I finally was invited, the chef who was cooking on the day, and this was sort of Alexander introducing him to some people in the New York community and food community, was Akwasi Brenya-Mensa, our guest on today's show. At the end of that evening, we found out that he and I have actually a good friend in common, a friend of mine, KMM, you know who you are, I'll just use your initials, but who used to be in New York and is now in London, knows Akwasi in London, now Akwasi's here. Anyway, we made that connection, and I invited him to come on the podcast. He is on the verge of doing a 10-week dinner series, and I say 10 weeks, but it's really 10 dinners distributed amongst 10 consecutive Fridays between this Friday, April 24, and July. So that is the sequence of events. I will link to where you can purchase tickets in the episode description for today's show. I will also link to where you can find more out about this quite fascinating guest that we have here. So I'm not going to belabor it anymore. I think that's all the orientation you need. Here you go. This is my conversation with Akwasi Brenya-Mensa. Here you go. Akwasi, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me, Andrew.
We've only known each other a couple of months, but we've had some fun exchanges. We've gotten together for a beverage. You have things going on here. But as we do here, I want to first talk about your backstory. First of all, would I be, and this is going all as far back as possible,
Okay.
were you born on a Sunday?
I was. Well done.
Thank you. Why
I
don't
was
you
indeed.
explain how I knew that? It's not magic.
No.
I'm not a mentalist.
So I guess the traditional names in my culture have days of the week aligned to them. Mine is Kwesi, which is born on a Sunday. I have two brothers that were born on a Tuesday. They're Kwabenas. And I have one brother born on a Friday, which is Kofi.
Wow. So two of your brothers have the same,
Yeah.
and the only differentiation would be what, like a middle name or something?
So the first Tuesday got Kwabena, and then my third brother, who was also born on a Tuesday, then that was made his middle name.
Ah, okay.
And then he was given Nana as a first name.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Now, just to carry through with this name analysis for a moment,
Yeah.
you have a hyphenate as a last name.
Correct.
Brenya-Mensa. I looked up the meaning of Brenya,
Okay.
and I don't know if this applies to your name or not, but essentially, as I understand it, in Ghana, that would mean basically no pain, no gain.
You know more than
This
I
is news
do.
to you.
This is news to me.
Yes.
I'm gonna ask my parents and research myself,
Yes.
but I have never actually looked it up. But
Yeah.
that's probably part of
coincidence.
the way that I approach things. So yeah.
Well, that's why I wanted to ask. Yeah.
There's definitely some truth in that for sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. But it's not, as far as you know, that's not an intentional.
Not as far as I know.
Okay. Okay. So tell me a little about your childhood in London, if you would, and I'd love to understand. Just, it can be broad strokes, but what your family life was like, and what kind of role food played in your young life.
Yeah, I mean, my house was the house in the neighborhood that everybody went to. It was essentially, you could call it a youth club or a community center. And so all of our friends would come around. Our house was always full. Our house was always busy. And I guess as far as the kind of food is concerned, I learned how to cook from my mum and my aunties, and all the women, in the Ghanaian community in South London where I grew up. And I was the eldest child of 4 boys, so I was by de facto my mum's little helper. So I would get taken to the markets and to the shops, and have to cut this and chop this and all of these various things. And I guess that just made me feel very, very comfortable in the kitchen.
You enjoyed it even as a child, because it sounds like this was you were sort of drafted into service as the
Yeah.
youngest child, but happily you actually liked it.
Maybe not straight away, but I think, like with anything, as you do more of it and as you get better at it, then you can come to enjoy it. And so I'd say I came to enjoy it, and then I came to find the kitchen to be kind of like a place of peace, if you will. Mm-hmm. At the same time, the kitchen could be like a scary place, because it kind of like operated as like the CEO's office, if you will. So telling offs were also in the kitchen, and bad news was also given in the kitchen, and good news was also given in the kitchen.
At a table or something?
No, just in the kitchen.
That's just where you
that was
were
like my
summoned.
mum's like command center, And if she needed to talk to you privately, or a message needed to be delivered, you would go into the kitchen.
Okay.
And I guess there were 6 of us in a house, and so the kitchen was on the bottom floor at the back. It was like if the kitchen door was closed, it was probably the only place like you had guaranteed privacy, if that makes sense.
Sure.
And
some things going on that probably provided white noise.
Yeah,
People
absolutely.
outside the room couldn't necessarily hear you.
Exactly that, yeah.
Yeah.
Plus, there'd be, a television on loud as well. So, I think it was probably the most like soundproof room in the house.
And is this right? You said, I think, in at least one interview, that there was sort of a funny twist of fate involved with your ending up in the kitchen. I think you said if any of your siblings had been a girl, you probably would not have had that role in the household.
Absolutely, yeah. Like culturally, if I'd had a sister, she probably would have, taken the role of, assisting my mum or helping my mum or, doing those things. So, yeah, I guess in that respect, I became my mum's de facto daughter, if you will. But
Well, I didn't mean it quite like that. I just meant
no.
fortune smiled on you in a way.
Absolutely, yeah. And I came to love it, and I came to enjoy. I think when you're kind of we were like 4 boys, and everyone's like running around, and everyone's, being boisterous. I don't know how my parents coped with 4 boys. I don't think I could, but
I don't know how people do 2 boys.
And so I think that then the kitchen also kind of like provided me with a kind of like respite from the busyness of the house, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
And so on some level it was kind of like, I find kitchens grounding, if you will. Not necessarily professionally, but certainly like in the home. I find them as like spaces I like to spend time in, even if it's, not anything related to food. I like to read in the kitchen or, listen to music in the kitchen. I really like that part of the house.
That's an interesting. I've never heard anyone say it quite like that before. That's fascinating to me. Because why? I mean, I know for a lot of people, cooking is sort of a meditative thing.
Yeah.
Like you just lose yourself in it. You're kind of extending that to just the space.
Yeah, absolutely. In the cooking aspect of it, I like the fact that when you're making something, you more often than not just focused on the thing that you're doing. You might be checking a recipe on a phone or something, but for the majority of that period, it's like you've got blinkers on. And I think now, where everything's so busy and we're so contactable, and emails and messages and phones and et cetera, like it's not that often that we have time where we're able to just solely do one thing, like whatever that thing is.
Sure.
But for me, like the kitchen is very much that. Even when I like try to take a relaxing bath, which is something I try to do more often, I still have to like catch myself from like, I'm thinking about emails, I'm thinking about work, But in the kitchen, I never really have to do that. If I'm making food, everything else just kind of dissipates.
Yeah. You're describing a mindset a lot of cooks and chefs talk about. Especially, I don't know have you found this? I feel like a lot of people who are in kitchens talk about having like ADD or OCD, and a lot of those people say when they get in the kitchen, it calms their mind. The task list and the constant taste, it just, like you just said, it just calms their mind in a way that little else does.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Yeah. Can you speak to the role of, I want to pronounce it, is it Ghanaian? Ghanaian.
Yeah.
The role of Ghanaian culture in your home. Is it right that you first learned, your first language was not English?
Yeah, that's correct. So
And that was house policy?
Yeah, my mum and dad were adamant that, because they were raising their children in a different land to the land that they grew up in, that their children would have a very strong sense of identity and of the culture in which they had grew up in. And I guess when, they were, I don't think they necessarily had a conversation about it, but I think when you're kind of thinking about, how you're going to do that, language is such a kind of like massive part of identity that, my parents were adamant. And I got many clips around the ear, English was not allowed to be spoken in the home. We spoke Tree, which is the Ghanaian dialect that we speak. That's what we spoke in the house. Obviously we learned English and we went to school and everything, but our parents wanted there to be, no doubt of the fact that their children would be able to speak the language. And, then when we go back home to Ghana, which we did so often, we'd be able to kind of speak the language, we'd be able to kind of fit in. We didn't feel so much as outsiders. You can still feel like an outsider when you go to the land of your origin because you have grown up in a different place. That's just part and parcel, but at least we could communicate, even if, you would sometimes get laughed at because your pronunciation is, not going to be the same as somebody that grew up there. But
And I assume accent is probably an issue.
absolutely, but that's part of, that's a fun part of life, and ultimately, we could get by, and
Yeah.
so, yeah, I'm proud
I'm
of
just
that.
curious, when I think about, and forgive me for overgeneralizing, because I know it is, but when I think about the British people generally, there is such a pride of country, of language, of, I'm just wondering, was that at all curious to kids that you grew up with, classmates, people who maybe came to your home? Was that any kind of did that ever become an uncomfortable feature of your life?
Not for me, because I guess because of the way I was raised and because of the way it's instilled in me, I felt that sense of pride about who I was and about where I came from. So it didn't present me with any difficulties. If we had people in the house that didn't speak English, then we would speak English. My parents weren't kind of rude about it, but
Right.
what they were kind of adamant about is that, when we are in like family mode, or when we're in the house and there's no one from outside of the house in the house, Tree is the language that we speak, because that's the language of our people.
And how did that extend to what was cooked in the home? Like, were you cooking dishes that were from Ghana, or?
Yeah, like from as early as I remember, my parents fed us what they ate, and they liked to eat food from back home. That's the food that my mum liked to cook. We used to go to markets and buy plantains and yams, and I remember always being terrified of when they would buy crabs, because they'd be alive and there'd be these like live crabs in the kitchen sink, and I'd be afraid to go in the kitchen. And I've been afraid of
came
crabs
into your
ever
sacred
since.
space.
Honestly, yeah. So it wasn't so sacred at that moment,
Right,
but yeah, from a very young age, it wasn't a thing of we kind of like ate a British palate and then changed. We ate, I guess in the traditional way that most immigrant families ate, and my mum cooked in bulk, usually at the weekend, and that food would last X amount of time, and
Right.
it was much less kind of large presentations of food rather than like by the plate, if that
Sure.
makes sense.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Just one or two more questions, and then we'll move on from this early part of your life. What kind of kid were you? I mean, apart from loving to be in the kitchen, were you a social kid? Were you an introvert? Did you play any sports?
I was, and I was an introvert, and I pretty much have been. I was very much a bookworm. I won many of the local library summer reading competitions, which I'm very proud of. And my name was up there for a long time. But I came to like, I didn't enjoy watching football, and by football I mean soccer.
Yes, thank you.
But I came to play it one day, and I just thought it was incredible. And then that's when I kind of became more interested in kind of like sports. But I would say as a kid, I was kind of like a bit of a sulky kid reading a book in a corner. And not sulky because I was like in trouble or anything. I've always had a serious demeanor.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm
yeah.
learning a lot about you today. I've totally misread you. Not that I didn't consider you a serious person.
No,
You
no,
seem
no,
like
no.
when you say a serious demeanor, that seems to me like someone who maybe has like some troubles on their shoulder and some things heavy things on their mind.
I mean, I don't know that I had those as a kid, but I was always being told to smile and
Right.
et cetera. So yeah,
Yeah.
In that respect, yeah.
I totally relate to that. My grandfather used to call me after all family gatherings and tell me how I'd ruined every picture.
Yeah. And I was told not to frown because I'll have lines on my forehead when I'm
Yes.
older constantly.
Yes.
All of these things. And my brother Kwabna, the brother immediately after me, he's the complete opposite. So he was always the auntie's favourite because he would always be grinning ear to ear. So yeah, it's one of those. These are the odd things that happen when you're growing up.
So we're going to talk about kind of this toggling back and forth you did between these two worlds, but music. You have a history in the world of music, and not a dabbling, like a real serious history. But how did music figure into your childhood? What did you like to listen to, and were there any instruments that you played?
I played for maybe a year the violin. I don't
By
particularly.
choice?
I think it was my mom's choice. Yeah. I don't know. Maybe I chose it. I'll have to ask her. But I played the violin very briefly. Music, I think for me, a few things. One, I was a massive Michael Jackson fan. I would listen to Michael Jackson. I wasn't allowed to touch my dad's record player, and I wasn't allowed to touch my dad's records. And I'd get a clip if I did, but I didn't care. I just, whenever he went out, I put the records on and listened to Michael Jackson's albums. I just wanted to dance like Michael Jackson and sing like Michael Jackson. But I think that because of how, I guess specifically West African immigrant families socialize, we have these kind of like large gatherings generally called hall parties. And they're usually in like a church hall or a community center, and there's such kind of like beautifully vibrant expressions of food and music, and they can also be funerals and things like that, joy, happiness, sadness, so many different things, but food and music are like real tenets of those. And I think that in the same way I had like this drawing towards food because of the passion and interest of my mum and my aunties, certainly like through my dad, I had this like love of music, and it just brought me real joy. And so when I went to like these under 18 parties at this place called the Metropole in Purley, and this is going back to the mid-90s, I think, I saw a DJ performing called DJ Randall, may he rest in peace, and I just thought what he was doing was incredible. And at that moment, I didn't know what he was doing, but I knew that I needed to learn how to do that because I wanted to be able to have this effect that he was having on all of us, and everyone was dancing and I was, but I was just mesmerized. And so I left there that day, probably maybe 13 or 14 years old, and said, I'm going to learn how to DJ. And so I got a job as soon as I could. I think in the UK, I think you can work when you're 16. At a shop called Woolworths, which I don't know what your equivalent of that would be.
Well, we have a Woolworths.
Really?
Yeah, I don't know if I'm not aware of them being overseas though. That's interesting.
This is interesting because I had this conversation with someone about an Australian Woolworths, and my brother sent me a picture of a German Woolworths. So I don't know if these are all independent Woolworths in places, but
years ago here, Woolworths was as common as like CVS.
And what do they sell there?
It was like a CVS. It was like a big convenience store, all kinds of.
Okay.
You wouldn't call it a department store.
Okay.
It was, sundries and things like that.
Okay.
So you start DJing. Now, this is interesting to me. I would love for you to talk about what, if any, correlation you see between music and cooking. I don't know how many people out there know this, but there are a number of chefs who have been DJs at some point in their life. Paul Liebrandt did that as a young man. April Bloomfield, the two people I just named are both British.
Yep.
April did it at home in the mornings. She may still do it, but I know that was like the way she's like used to start her day with headphones and two turntables.
Yeah.
Aisha Nurjawa, who's at Chouquette here in New York City, has been a DJ.
Oh wow. Okay.
Yeah, but I personally, well, let me not put words in your mouth. What if any correlation do you see between the two?
I think certainly DJs of a certain age, it's different now, but I think certainly if we go back to when I started, and certainly those before that, you would go to a record store and you would listen to the various tracks, and you would pick the tracks that you thought were good, and then you would go out and you would play those tracks. Now it's more, the selection is done for you more often than not. People tend to kind of go out to, depends on the party obviously, but people tend to go out to like hear the big tracks. And so I guess when of like really curating your kind of record collection, it's probably akin to, you know, going to the market and, you know, picking your produce and, you know, I want this and, you know, this is coming in season, et cetera, et cetera. So I guess there's something there about kind of like discovery, and, you know, once you have kind of like discovered, you know, your music or your ingredients, whatever it may be, then how you then share it. And I guess that's probably the through line between, you know, myself and those people that you mentioned, that I can see that makes both of those things appealing and, you know, I guess have alignment. Because yeah, it's interesting that, you know, people that would do this very, very specific thing would then, you know, go on to do this other specific thing. And to me, you know, as I answer the question, that's what I see.
Mm-hmm. So I love all of that. For me, I'd love to know if this resonates with you at all. I've always found the dynamics of it, I guess I would say, kind of oddly similar. You know, if you think about a DJ positioned off to one side of a space,
Yeah.
doing their thing,
Yeah.
and then all these people dancing to it,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
and
it
a
is.
chef
Yeah.
in a kitchen,
Yeah.
let's say it's an open kitchen or they have a window onto the dining room, they're putting out their food, so it's a different sensory, it's not here, it's here,
Yeah.
but you're filling a room with your food,
Yeah, yeah,
and you
yeah.
can watch people grooving to your food.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely. And
Does
that
work
was
for you?
100%. And, you know, my majority of my presentations of food, you know, I've never considered it like that, but I always go for open plan. I never really utilize a space if it's a separate kitchen.
Mm-hmm.
I just personal preference, but if you put it like that, then yeah, I guess you're absolutely right. It is exactly the same. And, you know, where I'm stood making the food could be a DJ booth, you know, 4 hours later, and that space would operate in exactly the same way. Yeah.
Hey everybody, Andrew here. I want to encourage you to check out our presenting sponsor, Mies. Not because they're our sponsor, but because Mies exists to make your kitchen life easier. Mies is the chef-created recipe operating system for culinary professionals. What that means is that Mies is a virtual place to house all of your recipes, and just as importantly, it enables you to derive all kinds of information from them. Food costs, allergen data, yield loss, unit conversions, and nutritional breakdowns. And also to scale them up or down, and even to cost them, and to do most of that at the press of a virtual button. Mies is also a teaching tool that empowers you to incorporate how-to photos and videos to illustrate individual recipe steps and techniques, which is especially useful and time-saving for multi-unit organizations. The basic version of Mies is free for the entire culinary industry. Upgrade to premium and let Mies make your entire business more efficient and centralized. Train and onboard team members, manage production, and even process invoices. Seriously, if you work with recipes in the pro kitchen or bar, Mies was built for you and will make your entire restaurant's or company's kitchen life easier. And as a listener of Andrew Talks to Chefs, receive 25 free recipe uploads and breakdowns on your new Mies account by signing up today. Learn more at GetMeez, that's GetMeez.com/ Andrew, simply click through via the link on the episode description for today's show. What did you think? You like to DJ, you enjoyed food. Those would both be not necessarily an automatic career thought for a young person. But so music was a passion, cooking was something you enjoyed. These are not necessarily careers that one thinks of. I mean, increasingly I think they are, but we never seem to get to that place. Was there something else you thought you were going to do before you started following those two things professionally?
What I thought I was going to do in my household was irrelevant, and what my mum thought or had told everyone at church I was going to do was much more relevant to my career path. And so I, from somewhere arrived the fact that I was going to become a doctor.
Really?
Yes, and so my GCSE subjects were on that basis, and my A-level subjects were on that basis.
What, did you have a particular kind of medicine that you were going to focus on?
I don't know, but I should ask my mum, and I'm sure she will tell me.
Wow, that is such a taxing pursuit for someone who's not into it of their own volition.
Absolutely, but when you are a firstborn child in a first-generation immigrant family, it is not your decision.
Wow. So how far down that path did you get?
I mean, in the A-levels, which I don't know what the equivalent here would be, but the exams you do before you go to university, which I think is college here, we realized very quickly that chemistry was not my strong suit.
Okay.
And so I had to kind of just do the best as I could with the horrifically difficult subjects that I picked.
Yes.
And then find my way to university, which is what I did. But, in reality, I should have been doing business studies, economics, these kind of things. I was always good at business. I was always starting businesses of my own. I was that kid that would, do DIY talk shops at school and all of these things. But medicine was the path that I was set upon, and I did not deliver.
Oh, well, I'm happy that you found your way to what you love.
As am I.
Because it's so funny because generationally, I think that used to be a much more common thing. Like kids would go to law school or medical school, and if they made it through, maybe they'd practice for like a year, and then they'd become I can't do this, I want to be a cook. Was there anything going on in those years that where you were kind of sticking your toe in the water of cooking? Like, did you throw dinner parties for people, or did you cook for friends, or was there any of that?
I always cooked for friends, and I learned that from my mum. So, in the same way that my house growing up was a place where people would come and eat, and my mum would cook for lots of people, and Christmas would be a big deal, Easter would be a big deal, every celebration would be a big deal. So when I moved out of the home and had my own place, I replicated that. I did the same thing, and the houses that we lived in, we would invite people over, we would have barbecues, we would do everything, and my housemates always complain about how much mess I made in the kitchen, which has probably not changed all that much since. But fortunately, when you work in a professional kitchen, you have other people to support you in that endeavor.
Right.
But back then, it was like a hurricane had been through the kitchen.
Because I used to have a rule when I cooked for friends that they had to clean. That was the arrangement.
Yeah, I mean, it often was, but at university, these kind of dinners would be, alcohol fueled, and were probably not like dinner and then an early night. They were probably dinner and then a night out, and then everybody would arise the next day
dinner
and
was
realize,
the pregame.
yeah, absolutely,
okay,
and realize that, oh my gosh, we have an entire kitchen to see to. Yeah, it is the worst
feeling. Okay, so before we break, I just want to start spinning your story toward where you are now. What were sort of the first steps you started to take into, as you see it, the path that led you to cooking professionally? Like, as you see it, what were sort of the early stirrings of that development?
I'd say around maybe 2010, when we had this kind of gourmet burger wave. And, you know, I loved burgers. I'd always loved burgers. We had 2 breakfasts growing up. My mum would be at work and my dad would make breakfast. Scrambled eggs and beans or burgers. So I loved burgers from a young age. And when I saw that burgers were kind of like being made, you know, into this kind of more premium version of themselves, then it became relatable to me, is probably the way I would describe it. And I was like, I mean, I can do that, you know. And so I tried doing it. And as of anything, I think one of my strengths is that I'm not afraid of being shit at things. That doesn't, it's never bothered me. And I've never really, well, maybe not it's never bothered me. It's never bothered me enough to not try the thing.
It's never been an obstacle.
Yeah, and so I've never really understood, just I guess because of how I'm built and not because there's anything wrong with this, but I've never understood when people don't want to start something because they're afraid they won't be good at it, because like my brain processes that as like, well, duh, you haven't done it before. Like, of course you would not be good at it, if that makes sense. So I started making burgers and they weren't good at first, but they got better. And so in order to kind of like, then like take that out of inviting some people to my house to like, okay, how would I do a pop-up or how would I start a street food pop-up? Then I essentially did a street food pop-up in the office of my company, which was an events company. And we just said to the staff, you can have free burgers, and then that lets us kind of like work out how to do it. And it was a learning experience. People were waiting a long time for food. We also like smoked out the office because we didn't do it outside. So, you know, the office,
the ventilation
yeah,
system's
the
capacity.
office smelled of,
Right.
you know, beef and fat for
Yeah,
at least a
sure.
couple of weeks afterwards. And then I guess more and more of that. And ultimately, then there was, this is when I was living in Sheffield, where I'd studied. And we basically came across a new street food market that was starting at the Picture House on Abbeydale Road. And I applied to go and do it. And they accepted my application. And then I did it. And it's just one of those. And, you know, I remember that day, I think it was my friend Neil, Zoe and Charlotte that came to help me. And none of us had done any of this before. You know, like I bought a gazebo, a tent, you know, that arrived 2 days before, and I had bought a grill. And, you know, I didn't have half the things that you need, but, you know, my friends came, lots of people came and supported, and, you know, we sold some burgers. And I'd say that is the beginning of me, you know, transitioning from, you know, cooking for friends to, I mean, that's the beginning of me charging money for cooking, you know? And that, yeah, just from there.
I have to ask because of what you're doing today, right? Was there anything about those burgers that echoed Ghanaian food, or like what made them your burgers?
No, essentially. They were burgers in the line of, I guess, what everyone else was doing in terms of street food. You know, I made my own sauces and pickles and things from scratch, and, you know, we sourced the buns and we sourced the meat and, you know, put everything together, you know, in my vision. But, you know, they were just, you know, regular burgers as, you know, you'd get at any of the, you know, good spots here.
Sure.
And at that stage, I hadn't really considered or wasn't thinking about how could I use food as a storytelling vehicle. And I guess ultimately, probably because I was so new or so early in the journey of, you know, food as business, that I was just focusing on how can I make the best burger? How can I make the process the best? How can I, I'd go and, sit in Subway sometimes and just watch, or go and stand in McDonald's. These like massive organizations, they spend so much money on R&D and training and logistics. By the time they do anything, they have spent millions in research. So I just go and watch them because like they know what they're doing, and it's backed by science.
Yeah.
So I just go and watch. Okay, right. So they put it on the grill there, and they have the things lined up here, et cetera, et cetera. And then we would kind of replicate and go to other places, see what places did. I would, sometimes accidentally wander into kitchens to see what equipment they were using and like take a picture so I could see if it was a piece of equipment we could afford. When you're starting out, you have to make it work as best as you can.
Yeah.
And so it was very much a guerrilla style operation, but I learned so much.
I love all this. Okay, we're going to take a quick break, and then when we come back, we're going to talk about how you started moving into the food you've become known for,
Yeah.
and we're going to talk about this residency. Is that the right word for it?
Um,
Pop-up? What do we prefer?
Dining series.
Dining series. We'll talk about the dining series that you have coming up shortly in New York City. We will be right back. This episode of Andrew Talks to Chefs was filmed at the iconic Gage Tollner restaurant in beautiful downtown Brooklyn. Situated for more than 125 years just across the Brooklyn Bridge from Manhattan and just steps from several major subway lines, Gage Tollner mingles a transporting landmark setting with contemporary standards of food and hospitality. Gage Tollner's current chapter began in 2021 when the restaurant was reopened by a trio of successful Brooklyn restaurateurs following a lovingly performed restoration. In addition to the expansive chandelier downstairs dining room, the second floor is home to the Sunken Harbor Club, Gage Tollner's very own tropical cocktail bar, and to two conjoined private spaces decorated to resemble a Victorian townhome. We film in one of those. Whether for any occasion dining, a drink or bite at the walk-in-only bar, or a private event, Gage Tollner looks forward to hosting you. For more information and/or to reserve your table today, visit the link in our episode description for today's show at andrewtalkstochefs.com or wherever you get your podcasts. All right, so I want to start talking about, you used the expression shortly before the break, storytelling through food. This is obviously something, I don't even think this existed, at least not here in the US. If you went back 25 years, it was, there were elements of chefs' heritage, right? Family background, all that, travels. But in terms of explicit storytelling, this has become, I think, one of the more exciting things happening in food. I would love to know, were there any chefs, projects, art projects, were there things out there that were sort of North Stars for you? Or did you come to this notion, are you first generation, as you see it, like culinary storyteller, where you just sort of, there was this thing happening, I think, in isolation in different places, and then all of a sudden we all looked up and said, wait a minute, this person's doing it here, and this person's doing it here. What was the genesis of that, just the seed of that notion for you, if you remember?
I think that it's something that I've been doing across the various work that I do. And so when it came to food, I then applied it to food, like in music, through the artists I work with, and, we had an independent record label. Even in the events, we had like a massive commercial events business, but then we had smaller, very kind of like specific, focused and more niche events that were much more about like the storytelling around like a music policy or an era and trying to recreate that. And so I think by the time that I came to food, I was already well versed in presenting my ideas as fully fledged concepts as opposed to simply a menu, if that makes sense. And even with the burger pop-up, which was called Juicy Kitchen, that was kind of like based around Notorious B.I.G. and he was like our logo. We never got a cease and desist, fortunately, but he was our logo, and we love the song "Juicy." And
Don't try it on this side of the Atlantic.
no, I absolutely won't. But it was like a riff on the song, and so by the time I came to the next iteration, or the next evolution of food, which was the supper club called Mensa Plates and Friends, that was then, I guess, like taking the street food, and then there had been, a Juicy Kitchen kind of restaurant. That was then taking that kind of idea into a kind of like daytime or brunch sitting concept. And then I guess I was thinking about, I think at that time, we were going into our early 30s or something, and I was thinking to myself, still at this moment, our main way of socializing is, going out, drinking, partying, etc. But like that, people start to get into relationships, people start to have kids. Everyone's not gonna be doing that in 5 years' time. And so what are we still gonna be able to do? And that's why I started the Supper Club, because it was like, you could, go out on a Sunday afternoon and attend this supper club, and, there'd be nice music and nice food, and you get to socialize, but, you could be home by 7 p.m. and, have an early enough night. And so that supper club I started that in 2019.
Okay.
And that supper club ran for 2 years as the Mensa Plates and Friends kind of like concept, which was still kind of burger related, but a bit more kind of like brunchy and different kind of dishes as well. And then I went to Ghana in December 2020 for the Year of Return, which was this kind of like massive celebration, and it was really a calling of Ghana to black people in the diaspora that maybe necessarily didn't know so much about, especially I guess to African Americans that didn't know so much about where their families were from, ancestor-wise. Mm-hmm. And black people all around the world, and Ghana was, I guess, really kind of like signaling and inviting people to come and visit Ghana as, I guess, as a kind of like gateway to Africa if you haven't been here before.
Had you not been before?
No, I had.
You had.
But when I was there,
yeah,
I had never seen. I would go very often, most winters, but I had never seen so many black people from other parts of the world, and especially America. And so that was like really interesting to me. But it was during that trip, by that point, then I had, done the burger concept. I had done my kind of like supper club concept. And it was during that trip then I started to think about, what does a concept based on the food that I ate growing up, and the food that I'm eating here, what does that look like? Because our food is super delicious, it's fantastic, I love it, but it is also very traditional. And so I guess my challenge to myself, as it is in a lot of my practice, is what does a contemporary version of this look like, or what does a version of it look like that's informed by my life experiences? I consider myself Ghanaian, I speak the language, I visit there, often, and I have so much family there. But I didn't grow up there. And in London where I grew up, we go to brunches and we go to lots of other kind of like ways of eating that are different to the traditional way of eating that I ate back home. And if I look at the kind of the West African eateries, at least when I was growing up, even to more recently, they're usually more old school. They're usually more kind of like mom and pop owned. And it's interesting when I think about how being here and looking at food, and I see so many restaurants in the US, and it's like open since 1907, open in 1835. And I just think, that is just to me, it's like mind blowing, because I think maybe like with our generation, and again, like the hopes of the parents, like those that came to the UK, for example, that, open restaurants, none of them would want that's not what they wanted their children to do, if that makes sense. Whereas here, there seems to be a succession and a pride in that succession. But whereas I guess like in what I was used to, it was, we've done this, so you don't have to, if that makes sense.
Totally.
So it's really like cool when you kind of look at those ideas and what they mean. And all, you know, those are also people at different stages of immigration. You know, I'm talking about somebody that's been here, their family's been here for 100 years compared to someone that's been in a place for 20 years, you know?
Yes. So, I mean, you say you identify as Ghanaian. I mean, you really, I've read this in interviews. You say you're Ghanaian-British rather than British-Ghanaian.
Absolutely, yeah.
Which is quite an accomplishment for your parents, given that, you know,
I mean, it's what they set out to do,
You
yeah.
did not grow up there.
Yeah, 100%.
Mission accomplished.
Absolutely.
Yeah. A quick note of thanks to one of our promotional partners, S.Pellegrino Sparkling Natural Mineral Water. For the past 125 years, S.Pellegrino has supported the art of fine dining in all of its ever-changing forms and nurtured the next generation of chefs through resources and mentorship. To learn more, visit sanpellegrino.com. You just kind of anticipated my next question, which is, and I'm always wondering how people come at this. You know, you talked about cooking the food of Ghana, of Ghana, excuse me, but you talked about how your own life experience, et cetera, would factor in. You know, and I can't speak to what it's like in London, but I feel like, you know, the food of Africa generally is finally having a moment here in the United States. You know, there's so many chefs exploring it in various ways. Actual brick and mortar restaurants, pop-ups, more experiential things that people do. And I always wonder, if I were a chef that was part of a moment like that, how comfortable would I be? And I don't mean this to sound like it's a real question. I'm always good. How comfortable? Because for a lot of people here, like you're here now, a lot of people tasting some of the things that you put out, but a lot of people who are putting out food these days, certainly in the United States, an American diner might be tasting those dishes or even hearing of those dishes for the first time ever, right? So I'm always thinking, how would I feel like I needed to be absolutely traditional because this is going to be the first time they taste a version of this dish? Or would I still feel like I'm going to do what most chefs do today, which is what you described, right? Well, I'm going to put my own little spin on it. Does that question make sense?
Yeah, it makes perfect sense.
Is that anything that you had to work through, or did it just seem automatic that, of course, I'm going to do my version?
I think that that's a decision every creative has to make for themselves. And I think that we have, you know, I guess, let's say like the new wave of, West African or, broader African chefs and cuisines that are being shown more attention. There's many ways you can go, Some of them are like very fine dining, some of them are super casual, some of them are kind of somewhere in the middle. I think you have to decide the food that you want to make, and that is informed by why you want to make it. And I don't think that there is a right way or a wrong way. I think that whatever you can kind of make, present, put in front of people and be proud of is the right way for you. And so for me, that is more often than not making things usually more closely aligned to how they tasted when I was eating them growing up. Now, I've been fortunate enough to have some experience. I didn't go to culinary school, and I haven't worked in the industry for years. Most of the things I've learned have been self-taught, but I did have, incredible experience of doing like a stage and working at a restaurant in London for a year in 2021, I think it was, under a chef called James Cochrane, and I learned so much there. He was one person that, he really took me under his wing, and he could see that, I had potential, and he was like an open book. He shared so much of me. He gave me really honest feedback on, things that I presented to him, and, suggested how I think about, how I approach what I want to do, etc., etc. And so I guess for me, getting that experience, and at that time I was still doing the supper club, but once I had that experience, and his restaurant was a fine dining restaurant in a casual setting, once I had that experience, that's when I felt like, right now I can create this kind of contemporary Pan-African concept of Tatale, because I feel like I know I have an understanding of the traditional side, but how I would make that contemporary without doing the thing of falling into the trap of, well, how do I make it acceptable to like people that are not familiar with this cuisine, I wanted to present my food in a contemporary style, but without it losing touch with what makes it what it is, And it's a tricky like path to straddle, and different people have different opinions about what I've achieved or what I've presented, but I'm proud of everything that I put out and the way that I put it out, and that's enough for me.
You can't make everybody happy.
No, of course not.
It's fun. Would I be safe in assuming that the most pushback you had was from people who knew the original dishes that you were taking liberties with? Because that seems to often, like Massimo Bottura talks about, who's been as successful as any chef in the world, right? But when he first opened Osteria Francescana, people were angry because he was doing this surrealist Italian food, and it was Italian people who were angry. Globally, he was making a huge name for himself, but it took a while for the Italian community to accept it.
Yeah, and I think that for me, I've had it in the restaurant. I always say to people that then I could sense when an auntie had walked in, like it was like Spider-Man, Spidey sense. I knew, but ultimately it was, even when someone kind of started off as, I guess, maybe not necessarily wanting to be a fan, I'd always go over and have a conversation. I'd always explain, what I've just explained here. And to be honest, in pretty much all of the instances that I can recall, like at the end, they were happy and they understood what I'd done. They understood that I'm not making what they would make. But I think when our restaurant space was beautiful. It was a brand new building. It was a really, really beautiful space. And I think that when they were able to come to a contemporary West African setting and eat contemporary West African food, it made sense, because the whole experience was kind of like guided by, the principles of what I was trying to achieve. And so even though at the beginning they were sometimes skeptical, I didn't have too many kind of examples of like what you've spoken about.
Hostility.
Yeah, and for the most part, it was massive support, to be quite honest. Like my community was massively supporting, even if people didn't understand, and people will always make comments, but for those that came into the restaurant and experienced the food and our style of service and the beautiful decor, we were good.
That's great. For people for whom the name went by quickly, it's Tatale, correct? Yes. Okay, I'll link to something about it if people want to go read about it. So here you are in New York. I'm not going to ask how anyone could conceive of coming to the United States right now. I won't make you answer that question. Well, I'm a tennis fan. The head of Tennis Australia for the last, I don't know how many years, just took the job as the head of the USTA, the United States Tennis Association. I'm like, really? Right now? Like, it's like, I'm looking at Canadian real estate all the time. Anyway, I won't make you answer that because I don't want to earn you any enemies. But putting that aside, you decide to come to New York. You have a series that's going to happen shortly after we air this episode But what are your plans here, and what made you want to move to the U.S. and to New York in particular?
I've been coming to New York for about 15 years now, and I've been through the music work. I was very fortunate to travel very extensively. In a 2-year period, I visited like 30 countries, and that's why I was saying, like, my concept is inspired by my heritage, but also inspired by my lived experience. And so every time, I think when there's a lot of synergy between New York and London. Everything in New York is more and bigger and crazier and all of these things, but it's a very similar type of energy in terms of you've got a lot of people that kind of want to get things done and are really kind of like on the front foot trying to make things happen.
And across all professions, right? From
100%.
starving artists to captains of industry.
Irrespective of what they're doing.
Yeah.
And so that was already an energy match for me. And I guess after, the success of the restaurant, thankfully, I was thinking about what I wanted to do next. And on the other hand, I felt, I had opportunities that I could follow in London for sure. But I felt like for me, as like a personal challenge, this was the scariest thing or the biggest thing that I could do. And so I guess I wanted to kind of come here and in some ways test myself. Because I think when you've done something in a place and you've become accustomed to a level of success, for me, then it would be nice to, I would say it would be nice to be a bit more chilled and to not be so, what's next, but I can't help who I am. And so I think New York represented like an ability for me to take the concept of Tatale outside of the city in which I grew up in. And, obviously I grew up in London, I've lived there for so long, I know lots of people there, all of those advantages, I don't have them here. I know some people here, but I don't have them here. And so I guess it's like the raw test of, what I can achieve with my creativity, with my skills, with my food, with my concepts, the food, the various art projects. And to me, it's just very exciting. It's exciting to be in a new place. It's exciting and frustrating to get lost on a consistent basis. My worst one so far has been taking the wrong bus. The bus wasn't going to Penn Station, it was going deep into Jersey. So I went 2 hours into Jersey. But yeah, and I think that what's happening here in food, as you've spoken about, especially as far as like West African cuisine is concerned, is like really, really exciting. So I feel like this is a really good time. And after I was featured in the New York Times article with Kwame from over here and Io for over here, and all of these other contemporaries of like West African food, but also black cuisine in general, I just thought that I guess all of these various things made the idea of being able to pursue my dreams in a new place here.
So the end goal is an actual brick and mortar restaurant here, or is that an open question?
I think that
you've taken your show on the road.
Yeah.
Okay,
certain,
that's where we are right now.
For certain, yeah.
Okay.
For certain.
So,
and I think that there are other concepts that I'd like to look at that for. I like the idea of Tatale as a dining series and operating, essentially without borders. I like that, and I think that there are other concepts that kind of lean into my heritage, perhaps in kind of like more casual approaches that would lean into brick and mortars for sure in the future.
Great. So dinner series, what shape is this going to take? It's across 10 nights, is that right?
12 nights.
Okay.
It begins on Friday, April the 24th. and it's at Atelier Jolie in NoHo. The first one is a collaboration with Hawa Hassan. I'm super excited to collaborate with. Hawa is incredible at everything she does, food, writing, and yeah, we're gonna, I guess, create a Tatale menu for that evening that, speaks to her heritage and speaks to my heritage. And then across the series, there will be, I guess, kind of 6, I guess, Tatale focused menus, as I've executed Tatale in other places, and then there'll be 6 collaborative sessions. And so the first 3 collaborations that be announced will be Hal Hassan, Natasha Pikowicz, and Art Comes First. And then as we kind of go down the line, the next 3 will be announced too. But I'm super excited about it. It's Atelier Jolie is a lovely, lovely space. I like the fact that, we're able to kind of create this dining series in a multidisciplinary space. Mm-hmm. And I think that diners are going to be able to enjoy a kind of a new and different expression of a cuisine that, they might not be familiar with, but within the setting and, with our approach, I think or hope they'll be very happy.
Great. Well, I'm glad you're here.
Thank you.
I think it all sounds very exciting. I will link to anything that you've talked about today that is linkable in our show notes. And I thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Cheers.
And that is our show for today. Again, my great thanks to Akwasi Brenya-Mensa. Links to where you can find out more about him and purchase tickets for his upcoming dinner series in New York City will be featured in the episode description for today's show at andrewtalkstochefs.com or wherever you get your podcasts. Please go check out Mise, the recipe operating system for culinary professionals, at getmise.com/Andrew. And our thanks, as always, to S.Pellegrino for their longstanding support of the pod. Andrew Talks to Chefs is the property and a production of Table 12 Productions Incorporated. If you'd like to support us, we ask that you do that by telling a friend about the show, posting about the show on social media, and or rating and or reviewing us at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you are now watching us on YouTube, please be sure to like and subscribe. Our thanks, as always, to After School Special for our music. Please check out their album, Double Barrel, Single Entendre on iTunes. Please follow us on Instagram and also on TikTok. @Chef Podcast is the handle on both platforms. Thank you for listening, and we will be back soon with another episode of Andrew Talks to Chefs.